Viewpoints on the talk station FM 107 AM 1240. A lot to talk about this afternoon about the impacts of, the past week's announcements. We've got to chat about the potential of, a national emergency associated with the wall, of course. And, between Ilhan Omar's remarks and those of Ocasio-Cortez, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, you've arrived, Mark, when you're known by your abbreviations or as an acronym. And with that, Marc Rotterman, host of Front Row with us this afternoon. Mark, good afternoon to you.
I'm going by Mark, formerly Mark.
It's Mark. Yes, I like that. M-A-R-C, by the way.
Formerly known as Mark.
Yeah, I like that. All right, we've got to come up with your very own. We could do MR, but then it'd be Mr. MR. Yeah. Anyhow. Okay, so what's happening in the Democrat Party right now?
Well, I think there's a schism.
Really?
Well, look, it's very clear that Amazon pulled out of Queens.
Oh, no, wait. Well, hold on. Pardon me. Stop right there, Mark. My apologies. For those who are not aware of this, Amazon today announced they are not going to locate in New York, in Queens, New York, as a matter of fact. And, of course, one of those issues, and we've got a caller standing by, one of those issues is, do you think that the complaint by Representative Ocasio-Cortez is the reason?
Let me run it down.
Okay. All right.
The majority of New Yorkers, according to a poll just taken a couple of days ago, wanted Amazon to locate there.
Mm-hmm.
There was a very poor part of Queens which would have employed 25,000 people, which is not right next door to Ocasio-Cortez's district.
Right.
The average starting wage was $150,000. But she ginned up the resistance so much that they decided they didn't need the headache. They wanted to go to a community that wanted to welcome them. Cuomo, who's the governor, Andrew Cuomo, came out today and said it was a fringe group of Democrats and politicians that stopped them from coming to New York City.
Wow. Okay.
But I think you're seeing a break now because are the Democrats really going to embrace the Ocasio-Cortezes? Are they really going to embrace the Green Deal? Are they really going to embrace what that woman is saying on the Foreign Affairs Committee?
Okay, we're going to get into that. I'm also, I have a question about the impact of Amazon in general and also on the impact of on Queens. But before we do that, Mark, we've got a caller standing by. Let me get John in Jacksonville to join us. John, good evening to you. Thanks for joining us. Your thoughts, sir?
Hey, Lockwood, I'm going to throw something into the mix for discussion, and your guest may want to comment on his show. But here's my thought. With this Ocasio-Cortez and her Green Deal, I had a theory the other day that all these Democrats standing behind her the other day when she was making her public presentation, think about it for a moment. Really, the only thing the Democrats want is to get enough people who are ignorant to vote for Democrats so that they can get the power back. And I believe that's what's at stake here, or at least in part. And I'll hang up and listen. Thank you.
Thanks very much, John.
Look at the plan.
Go ahead.
The initial plan, which was put out, then they denied, but it was up on the website.
Well,
if you didn't want to work, you could still get welfare.
Right. Now,
okay, so it's very hard. Responsible Democrats are running away from it.
That's the thing I want to talk about for a moment. But I want to get back to John's remarks here, and we will refer to that in a moment, John. Thank you for your call. I want to go back to the issue of Queens. In reality, if Amazon had located in Queens, number one, I think they would have basically they would have chased a lot of the residents out of Queens that were already there.
Well, they've driven up prices. That's the other question.
Yep.
On the other hand, a lot of people would have been put to work, and there have been a lot of money generated for New York City. Let me say something that's very interesting, which I heard today. Amazon, for the second year in a row, didn't pay any corporate taxes.
Right.
Now, how do they do that?
That's another problem I have, and I'm curious how, and by the way, in the second hour, we're going to be chatting with our millennials on that very topic. Does that generate some concern on their part in light of the fact that here they are struggling to make ends meet and they're paying taxes? How come you've got a major corporation like Amazon not paying taxes? And on top of that, I know the overall cultural influence that a company of that nature and physical influence that a company of that nature is going to have, they were
going to get $3 billion to locate there, but a lot of people call it corporate welfare. But they have to meet goals. They have to meet deadlines.
Right.
So many people hired, et cetera, et cetera. Let me say, Jeff Bezos, the chairman of Amazon, the president, CEO, worth $125 billion. I don't think he needs any corporate tax breaks to locate anywhere.
And that's a number that, again, I can't even comprehend. All right, back to the issue of the decision.
That's not what we heard.
Well, thank you very much. My brain. Marc Rotterman with us this evening for a few more seconds. He's trying to make me. He's, of course, just to remind you, the host of Front Row is seen tomorrow evening on WUNC-TV's main channel, 8:30 p.m. And then 9 p.m. At the digital channel, and then Saturday, 4 p.m., Sunday, 9:30 a.m., both on the digital channel, and then again noon on Sunday on WUNC's TV's main channel. Front Row with our guest, your host, Marc Rotterman. Marc, the impact of that announcement, does that in any way damage the Democrat brand?
Well, I think the Democratic brand is being damaged in a lot of ways: foreign policy, economics. And by the way, what you're seeing now is people are leaving New York in droves because of the high taxes that's associated with living there. Same with Illinois, the same with California, and they're going to places like Florida. They're going to places like Texas. And by the way, that's what corporations are doing. It's just not feasible for corporations to relocate in New York or Illinois or some of these other places or California because of the high taxes of those states. So I think what this is about is that free markets work, low taxes work, and a great visual or example of that is North Carolina.
Okay. And that's the next issue associated with Amazon. Of course, there are many of us, I being one of them, when Amazon announced that they were relocating, interestingly enough, they had bifurcated. One point was going to be in Northern Virginia, right around Washington, D.C. and
Arlington.
And the concept of that just boggles my mind because I cannot imagine what impact that's going to have on traffic. And then, of course, the other location, Queens. Now, North Carolina was a candidate for the future of Amazon, and many in North Carolina were hesitant about that because, as I mentioned earlier, Amazon has a means of consuming not only the city, the region, and potentially even the state. And I think a perfect example of that is what we've seen in Washington State alone. Let alone in
they control the politics there. They could change the politics in North Carolina. Let me just say, I don't think that they're, for right now, going to look to relocate anywhere else. They're in Nashville, and they're in Arlington. What I think they'll do is they'll expand in both those places and absorb that which was going to be in Queens.
I tend to agree with you on that. All right, before we go to the break, let's go one other caller joining us here in a moment, Ernie in Emerald Isle. Ernie, and of course we've got Marc Rotterman with us. Good evening to you, Ernie.
Good evening, and good evening to Mark. I find this absolutely incredible. I heard this today also, that Amazon paid no taxes, no income tax. Is that true?
Yeah.
Now, what is Donald Trump's net worth compared to Jeff Bezos' empire? Chump change.
Trump change and chump change.
It's about it's about 1/30th. Trump's worth about $5-6 billion.
Well, let's call it Trump change.
Yeah.
Okay.
I like it. Yeah.
Now Trump is an astute businessman and takes advantage of every tax advantage or so-called loophole that he can.
I only
wish I were so astute. I pay taxes on my Social Security, my meager pension, and my little part-time business I pay taxes on all that stuff.
And you know,
how do I become as astute as Jeff Bezos?
I get an army of accountants.
Well,
and that's what it is. He's got an army of accountants. But what's ironic is, if we'll talk about taxes, look what Bezos is doing, and not one Democrat wants to investigate what he is doing. Yet the Democrats, are pushing the investigation that they're going to do from Adam Schiff now on the Intelligence Committee is to get to the bottom line of how much tax Donald Trump pays.
That's a very good point. I want to bring that up here in just a few moments. But Ernie, as we wrap it up, any final comment? But that's a good observation on you and bringing those two issues to play at the same time.
Yeah, and one further one. I think I read this morning. I heard that Bill Gates decided that he's too rich, made too much money, and he doesn't deserve it. And he needs to pay more taxes.
Well, I can help him out with that.
Okay, I can help him out with the too much money part.
Ernie, thanks for the call. Appreciate that. We're going to take a quick break here, and Mark and I are going to try to figure out how we can put together a panel of folks who will distribute some of those extra unnecessary revenues that apparently the folks at Bill Gates thinks he has. I'm sure that I can. Don't bother to call in yet. We'll give you a number here a little later on where Mark and I will consider your request. Stay with us here on Viewpoints on the Talk Station. Viewpoints on the Talk Station, FM 107 AM 1240. We're now determined that our guest has his own acronym, Marc, M-A-R-C. It just so coincidentally happens to be his first name, Marc Rotterman, host of Front Row. Well, you've got AOC. Why can't you have MARC?
Formerly known as Mark.
Formerly known as Mark. Who is the host of Front Row on UNC-TV's main channel, 8:30 tomorrow evening, 9 o'clock on the digital channel, and other times during the weekend. So not only do you get to hear Mark this evening, you get to hear and watch him tomorrow evening. Mark, before we go any further, let's go to Chris in Vanceboro. Chris, good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon, Lockwood. Mark. My wife brought up this wonderful observation. Isn't there a line on the income taxes where you can donate X amount of money to downgrade the national debt?
I think there is.
That's what Bill Gates needs to do.
I like the idea in light of the fact that the national debt is now going to $22 trillion. By the way, Chris.
And no end in sight.
No. And Chris, do you know how many zeros are in a trillion?
Oh, a trillion of them.
Thank you very much. Good job.
Yes.
I like that, Chris. Thanks for the call. Appreciate
yes,
that, sir. All right. That's a good point. All this hue and cry about I'm making too much money. Well, they can easily give it away. All right, Mark, looking at the results of Amazon, and let's talk about the new Green Deal or the Green New Deal, whichever. What's the brand now for the Democrats? Because
first of all, I think it's worth noting that the president's approval ratings have gone up significantly in the last 2 weeks.
Okay.
You have a very strong economy. The average is still only 45, 46, real clear politic average. But Rasmussen had him up to 52. Now, within the Republican base, he's anywhere between 83 and 90%.
Okay.
So his base, they're going to have is solid for him.
All right.
And who you have now is Kamala Harris and all these people who talk about smoking pot, and she was listening to Tupac Shakur, who, by the way, wasn't even a radio.
I know.
So try to be in hip. I don't think they're serious people. I think the president thinks the toughest challenger that he would have to that office would be Biden.
Okay, let's talk about one other, and that's Omar, and I'm trying to Ilhan Omar. Ilhan Omar. Her comment this past week relative to a anti-Israel or anti-Semitic trope. Again, will that hurt the Democrats?
Well, I think it's going to really hurt them in the Jewish community. And she still continues to rant on about getting money to Israel. One of the things, and her behavior yesterday towards Elliott Abrams in the Foreign Affairs Committee, vis-a-vis the discussion about Venezuela was abhorrent. Just making statements saying that he's a liar, this, that, and the other, not giving the man a chance to respond. I question, first of all, Nancy Pelosi's judgment for putting her on the Foreign Affairs Committee.
Mm-hmm.
And two, does she really need to be seen classified briefings? See, I don't think she does, because she has been associated with some groups that clearly are, how can you say, questionable.
Okay. Now let's talk about another issue, and related to the president's numbers. Of course, we now have a budget proposal, one that no one's had the opportunity to read. Secondly, we have a compromise on the issue of government shutdown and whether or not we have a wall being built. Both of those issues. What impact does this have on the president? Let's start with
first of all, the Senate just passed it. It was like 83-17.
Okay.
Or 15. I mean, I think a couple people didn't vote. Okay. And by the way, on that bill, Tom Tillis carried the water on that bill.
All right.
Now, there's a lot more money in for illegals, for doctors, this, that, and the other. He only got $1.5 billion for 55 miles of wall. A lot of people think he should just go with the continuing resolution, which would at least give him $2 billion. But what the White House has indicated, and I know you've been busy, is that he's going to sign it and then declare a national emergency. Once he does that, though, there's a pot of money that he can get at. And one of the things I really do like, which can be done from the Justice Department without any legislation, is they can seize all of El Chapo's assets, which is about $15 billion.
Right.
The president can take that and just say, hey, I'm using that for the wall. Now, obviously, when he declares a national emergency, the Democrats are going to sue.
Right.
They're going to judge shop, go right to the 9th District, and it's going to go to the Supreme Court. So, and that's where we are, unfortunately, because the majority of these people, like Schumer, Pelosi, and all of them, voted for defense in 2006, voted for it in 2011. But this is not really, in their mind, they care less about securing and having sovereign borders and more about power and getting these people to vote for them. One thing I found very important, I don't want to filibuster, the Angels' moms went by Pelosi's office yesterday.
That's the other question I wanted to ask you.
And not even an aide would meet with these women who have lost their children to illegal aliens. Pelosi didn't give them the time of day, but not even an aide. That's just wrong. I'll tell you, I don't care who you were when Walter Jones was alive. If you went by his office, somebody would talk to you. Somebody would see what your problem is.
Our guest, of course, is Marc Rotterman, host of Front Row, as seen tomorrow evening, 8:30 on UNC-TV's main channel, 9 o'clock on the digital channel. All right, Mark, we've got a budget, $22 trillion. The feeding frenzy continues on spending money, and it is interesting and coincidental. We are recognizing the late Walter Jones, who made as his regular mantra a growing national debt.
He was very concerned about it, and really from about 8 years into his tenure as a congressman.
Right.
He became very concerned about it. He knew that America was living not within its means. And there's no appetite, it's a pox on both houses, in the Republicans or the Democrats, to curb spending. And what we have now, I mean, we're going to talk about it on Front Row this week. Ivanka Trump and Joni Ernst are proposed, help put together a bill for paid family leave.
Right.
But the question is, do we really need another government entitlement when we have a $22 trillion debt?
A very good question.
And that's the kind of questions we'll be talking about this week. But it just seems to me that it's going to have to come to a complete crisis for us to get the picture of what's going on. I mean, I think the service on the debt now.
This is the thing that really I keep wondering, when are we going to look at the service on debt and how we're going to fund this? I know later this evening we'll be chatting with our panel of millennials. I'm going to bring up this topic. Does this concern them? And I'm wondering, will this be a topic looking forward into the campaigns coming up? We've got, of course, and we'll chat about this here in a few moments, the campaign in North Carolina for one congressional district, possibly two, the third for sure, with the office left vacant by the passing of Congressman Walter Jones, and then, of course, the disputed issue in the ninth
congressional district.
But my question is, there's a point, Mark, where I'm thinking that the political parties are going to have to, I think they're going to be forced to have to deal with this.
Well, it seems to me that the Congress people up there now only react at a crisis. They can't even seem to put a budget together.
Right.
Without shutting the government down one way or the other, or a continuing resolution. I don't think, the last time we really ever had a balanced budget was with Bill Clinton and Newt Gingrich.
I know that. Bill Clinton Well, all right, we've got a caller standing by. I'm going to get Ernie back on very quickly. Then we're going to take a break. We've got with us this afternoon Marc Rotterman, host of Front Row. Ernie, yes, sir. Welcome back.
I'll be real quick. Wouldn't it be poetic justice if Trump said, I'm going to use El Chapo's drug money to finance the rest of the wall, and thumb his nose at everyone that said Mexico's never going to pay for the wall?
Well, that's what I'm saying, Ernie. And by the way, they do asset forfeitures all the time.
Right.
So rather than give it to the DEA or anybody else, wouldn't it best use of that $15 billion that they've seized to build the wall to stop some of these drugs coming in?
No question. But what's interesting, and Ernie, you're absolutely right. It would be a double commitment, what's the word I'm looking for?
Entendre.
No, a double whammy. Double whammy, because he will have fulfilled two promises, not one.
Yep.
Yeah, it would just be such an ironic thing. And by the way, I mean, Bill Barr, who just was confirmed as Attorney General today,
right. Yes,
can implement that.
Oh, all right. Ernie, thank you again for that call. Appreciate that.
Yeah, sure.
Okay. All right, we'll take a quick break on that with our guest, Marc Rotterman, host of Front Row. We're going to chat briefly about North Carolina politics here for a few minutes, then we're going to find out what's on tap tomorrow evening on Front Row, as seen on UNC-TV's main channel, 8:30 tomorrow evening, 9 o'clock on the digital channel, Saturday, 4 p.m., Sunday, 9:30 a.m., both of those times, the digital channel, and then noon on Sunday on North Carolina's main channel, noon on Sunday, a refeed of Front Row with your host, now famous, 4 letters, M-A-R-C, Marc Rotterman. You're listening to Viewpoints. Viewpoints on the talk station, FM 107 AM 1240. As you heard just a moment ago, Rachel Mills, one of our regulars here on the Y Factor, coming up here in another 15 minutes or so, our panel of millennials. Marc Rotterman with us for a few more minutes. Marc, of course, the host of Front Row, as I was been mentioning, tomorrow evening, 8:30 on UNC-TV's main channel, 9 o'clock on the digital channel. Marc, let's talk about North Carolina politics and the events of the past week nationally. Does that, going back to the issue of Amazon, the topic of the new Green Deal, North Carolina Democrats, they are still relatively conservative. I know that the state's demographics are changing because of new arrivals, but I don't see this helping the Democrats in North Carolina. Your thoughts?
Let me just say this. One, I think that you can love or hate Roy Cooper. I think if the National Democrats would follow his blueprint, they'd be in much better shape.
Interesting. Okay.
Two is, I thought what he did with making Chief Justice Beasley, the first African-American woman, was a brilliant stroke. I'm not talking about her philosophy, but she'll be on the ticket. That'll help drive African-American turnout for the Democrats. But in the North Carolina 3, if we could talk about that just for a second.
Let's talk about that, yes.
Congressman Jones' successor, first of all, I don't think anybody can really succeed him.
Right.
2 is, Walter was unique to that district. His constituent work was second to none. He was approachable. Everybody liked him, even if they didn't really agree with him. and the family had been there for decades with his father. Now, I think the Democrats have the best opportunity they have had, literally in decades, because they've got a centrist, Scott Thomas, or his brother, who was Greenville mayor, are both considering running. And by the way, they can both self-fund. Meanwhile, you're going to have a Republican Party with a cast of thousands in a primary. Now, I don't think we've heard 4 or 5 people, Miss Nix, the Republican county chairman, Phil Law, I think Greg Murphy, a state rep, and you'll see others jump in there. And so you could have 6 or 7 people, which then gets it down to turnout race because TV really won't work at that time. And there is a 30% rule. But I think the Democrats, if you've watched recently, they fielded better candidates for state senate. I think they'll gravitate to one candidate for Congressman Jones' seat, and which I still call the Jones seat.
Right.
And so meanwhile, when the Republicans are all at each other's throat, you'll have a Democrat raising money, getting organized for the general election.
Very interesting observations from Marc Rotterman. Mark, one other observation about Congressman Jones, and I want to chat about this in comparison to that of Mark Meadows. I was talking about that earlier this week. It is interesting. Both Jones and Meadows have a national stage in Washington, D.C. Meadows, of course, with the Freedom Caucus and having close relations with the president. And then at the other end of the scale, quite frankly and literally, being Walter Jones. And yet both Congressman Meadows and Congressman Jones were friends. In fact,
well, they both Walter never liked to do national TV.
Right.
And if you know anything about Mark Meadows, he's all over Fox.
Right. He's very aggressive.
And he has a personal relationship. Walter never. He wanted to do, and I'm not saying that Mark Meadows doesn't want to do what he thinks is right. Walter did what he thought was right. He was never interested in being a committee chairman.
But he
could see Boehner for who he was.
Yes, and that was, I mean, if there's anybody, correct me if I'm wrong, he was Boehner's number one, that is former House Speaker, John Boehner's number one target. I mean, I think.
Well, he took Financial Services Committee away from Walter, but it didn't really faze Walter. But I thought today to myself, Boehner would be lucky to have that many people show up at his funeral.
Marc Rotterman, host of Front Row. I shouldn't smile about that, but yeah,
Walter was. I didn't. We switched him in '92. My wife did from a Democrat to Republican, and we ran his races from '94 to 2008. Okay, and we had some disagreements.
Right.
But you can never not say that Walter didn't have a good heart.
Well, he did. And I want to, we've talked about the impact on that congressional race. Now, my question to you is, we've got a Senate race coming up in 2020 as well. Obviously, we're looking at a temporary position filling Walter's seat. It would be a run again in 2020 because it's automatic. My question, how much of this will suddenly draw the attention of the National Democrat Convention? National Democrat Committee?
Well, no, I think the National Democrats, I've been told they are going to field a well-funded candidate for Walter's seat. They are also going to field a well-funded candidate for Senate. And I would also say to you, when I have no real knowledge, but I've heard rumblings that there could be a primary in the Republican Party for Senate.
Wow. Okay, Marc Rotterman, you're listening to him this evening. This is brand new to us here on Viewpoints. Mark, let's move to tomorrow evening and Front Row. First question, who will be your panel?
Well, Mitch Kokai, the John Locke Foundation, frequent guest on Viewpoints.
Right.
Donna King, host of the morning show on WPTF. Joe Stewart, a political analyst, and former state representative Ed Haynes from Greensboro. We'll be talking about the presidential family leave proposal, the new Chief Justice that was just appointed by the governor, We'll be talking about the what's happening, the latest from the General Assembly, and as it stands now, Washington avoiding that other shutdown.
And let me get a bet from you. What are the chances of a shutdown? It looks to me like
it's all baked in the cake now. Sarah Sanders said he's going to sign it. He will sign it. He'll immediately declare a national emergency.
Okay.
And then he'll start looking for pots of money. Trump has told Sean Hannity that he thinks there's at least $900 million out there that he can get, maybe $2 billion.
Okay. That's our guest, Marc Rotterman, host of Front Row. Pay attention to the program tomorrow evening, 8:30 on WUNC-TV's main channel, 9 o'clock on the digital channel, 4 p.m. Saturday, 9:30 a.m. Sunday, all on the digital channel of WUNC-TV. And just in case you've missed those, noon on Sunday on WUNC-TV's main channel. Mark, as always, thanks for being with us.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it.
Viewpoints on the talk station. Stay tuned. The Y Factor just around the corner.